listening to the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Erin.
I'm Bree.
And I'm Rachel.
Today we have a Hymn Sing with Sarah Day. And we get to go international today, which is something we haven't done yet for a Hymn Sing with Sarah Day. But we might have to, I don't know. We might have to do it more often because there are international Lutheran hymnals now.
It's true.
And it's very exciting. But Spanish might be the only one I have a chance at actually understanding what's happening in the hymnal. So it is Hispanic Heritage Month from September 15th to October 15th in the United States. And there's also been a somewhat recent major achievement in the Spanish-speaking Lutheran world with a new Lutheran Spanish hymnal.
Yes.
And I have it with me. I have props today.
Ooh.
Yes. This thing is a solid,
Holy cow! How thick is that?
It is heavy.
That is like a half an inch shy of what I would use mostly to press wildflowers with. Like, that is a substantial book.
It's the size of one of the Lutheran study Bibles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
It's close. It's maybe not quite, but very close.
It's close. It's 1,000. Missed a zero there. 1,075 pages.
That is formidable
Compared to
and
our-
impressive.
Our Lutheran service book has, 1,024. So I guess it just feels nice and thick. It's wonderful. So in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month, we're going to talk about this new Spanish hymnal that I had the absolute joy of being able to search through over the last couple of weeks. I only know a small amount of Spanish, though, so I can't actually give you a full rundown of hymns and things like I normally do with these hymn sings because I am nowhere close to fluent enough to be able to do any of that. However, I have friends. Well, new friends now, I suppose. New friends
One
that
might say amigos.
who I was able to talk to, and I got a whole lot of information from a lot of different people today. I went full pseudo-journalist for this one and got to interview a bunch of people and compile all this stuff together, and it was very fun, and I'm super, super excited about this. I think we need to make him nerd stickers in Spanish now and just send them out to the Caribbean region, and it's a good idea. We should do
You'll have
that.
to see how that works.
Yeah, I don't know what that would be.
Hymnard is so idiomatic that we're going to have to ask them, what do you call somebody who gets super nerdy and geeky about hymns? And I'm sure they could come up with something.
That's a good point. I don't think that would translate well.
No.
So I want to give a huge thanks to all of my amigos nuevos. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it, girl.
Ooh, high school Spanish coming back to me. For all of their help. I literally could not have written this podcast without all of these people. So Reverend Ted Krey, who is the regional director for LCMS International Mission for the Latin American and Caribbean region, he was actually in the building when I started researching this just by happenstance. So that worked out really well for timing. And he was the one that gave me the hymnal. He gave me a whole bunch of information. The Reverend Sergio Fritzler was a hymnal committee member for this. Deaconess Sandra Rhein also happened to be in the building at the same time for the Day of Thanksgiving for International Mission. She's a sacred music educator in the Asia region with LCMS International Mission, and the one that has put together all of these other international Lutheran hymnals. It's amazing. The Reverend Novelli-Oliveros, who is the outgoing president of the National Hispanic Convention. We've had him on the coffee hour a couple times too. Super cool dude. He gave me a little bit. The Reverend Nathan Sherrill, he is with David's Harp. And then Deaconess Cheryl Naumann, who is also a missionary in the LAC region and the director of the VDMA project with LCMS International Mission. And the Reverend Jon Vieker at Concordia Seminary, and who knows literally everything there is to know about Lutheran hymnody. This guy's the expert. So all of those people gave me a whole bunch of stuff. There is also a massively long list of people in the back of the hymnal who had a hand in this hymnal. It was just this huge collaborative project between a whole lot of people, which just makes it even that much cooler. So there's a whole bunch of more people who I'm sure I could have talked to had I had 6 months to work on this and to get even more stories about this. And I'm sure in another 10 years after it's been in use for a while, there's going to be some really cool stories too. But This is still very new. So this is going to be a lot of the like background of how this all came together and also all of the details of why this is super cool. So maybe I'm not emphasizing it, or maybe I'm overemphasizing it, and you're going to get annoyed at how often I'm going to say that this is just a super cool project. How awesome this is. It's called the Himnario Luterano for Spanish-speaking Lutherans, literally the Lutheran Hymnal in Spanish. This project began back in 2007.
Really?
So this has been going on. Yes.
That's about how long it takes to make a book this big. But
wow. 15 years.
Yeah.
I know. It has been going on for a very, very long time. It began with a proposal in 2007 from the Lutheran Church of Chile to produce a Lutheran hymnal, and they printed a Christian hymnal with liturgy and songs in 2004. So they were kind of already working on this concept that it would be a really good idea to have a Lutheran hymnal in Spanish. But it took this long for the project to be completed. So this became the project of what's called the Southern Cone of Latin America. So that's 3 Latin American church bodies: the Lutheran Church of Argentina, which is Iglesia Evangélica Luterana Argentina, the Lutheran Church of Chile, which is Iglesia Luterana Confesional de Chile, and the Lutheran Church of Paraguay, Iglesia Evangélica Luterana del Paraguay. And it's going to serve church bodies all across Latin America and the Caribbean. This timeline, thanks to the Reverend Fritzler for sending me this massive project plan for this hymnal with all of these details and all of the things that happened, and a lot of pictures too from the last 17 years.
I like pictures.
Yes. So hopefully I will get some of those in the show notes for this so you can see the progress of what was going on with this. So this started with an idea and this great enthusiasm for creating this resource, but they didn't really know how it was all going to turn out and how much work was actually going to have to go into this. So from 2009 to 2012, about 20 pastors from the churches in Chile, Argentina, and Paraguay selected the hymns and liturgy using the Christian hymnal from Chile as the basis. And they all met in 2011 to sing through everything they had and decide where to go from there. That is a lot of hymn sing action going on right there. From 2012 to 2017, all of the editing, doctrinal review, and writing of new hymns happened. And this was a very, very lengthy process. So it went through doctrinal review, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not even 4 times, but 5 times by the churches promoting this project.
He could never.
Well, and that's really formidable because you've got multiple church bodies who all have to sign off on it. And I'm sure that we all have slightly different strategies for putting things through doctrinal review and maybe even slightly different things that people are looking for. That's such a major project.
Well, and part of me wonders too, how much when we talk about translating from one language to another, and you're talking about something as pure and unchanging as the Bible and theology and doctrine. And so when things are naturally lost in translation, are you dealing with 2 different bodies that to one person would mean one thing and to another person would be another? You know what I mean?
It's the challenge of hymn translation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So the cool thing about this, and I think I have this a little bit later in my notes, but since we're talking about it, the cool thing about this hymnal is that, there's translation going both directions for this hymnal. So a lot of things they did take from LSB and translate into Spanish. They translated a boatload of German hymns into Spanish, obviously, because a lot of our Lutheran hymns come from Spanish. But then there was also
German. A lot of our Lutheran hymns come from German.
Thank you. But then also there was all of this new hymn writing that was happening. So they were just writing a lot of new hymns that were culturally Spanish for this hymnal that now Dr. Vieker actually wants to take some of those hymns, those new hymns that are written in Spanish,
English,
and translate them into English.
I love that. I hope that happens.
Yeah, so there's this whole circle of life, of a circle of hymnody,
circle of song
happening. Yeah, the hymnody just keeps kind of getting passed around and translated from their original languages into different languages. And the daughter church is now grown up enough that hymns are being translated back to the mother church. It's just really cool how all of this is happening. And yes, and I was going to say too that the doctrinal review process for this is not the same as what we know as doctrinal review in the LCMS. Similar, but it was mostly just done within the hymnal committee itself, which is a large committee, but it was mostly done within the hymnal committee itself. It wasn't like passed around to, 100 different people in different church bodies. But all of the hymns were coming from multiple different places. Sandra Rhein said that each church body that was contributing to this hymnal also contributed hymns. So you also have all of these hymns coming from all of these different church bodies. So it's just, compiling all of these things from all of these, I think it was 14 different church bodies. I could be saying that wrong. Maybe 17, somewhere around there. A long list of church bodies that were contributing to this. So the committee was formed in 2013 with the Reverend Alejandro Lopez, Reverend Christian Rautenberg, and Reverend Sergio Fritzler and David Saar. And by 2017, all of these men on the committee were in vastly different geographical locations. So that was another thing that they had to figure out. Like one was in Canada and one was in Dominican Republic and one was in like Argentina and Chile. So they were all over the place trying to do this also remotely at this point as well. And they did get together in person several times over this long process for like these hymnal committee intensives that they would do all of this work. So I'm sure those were very interesting meetings to go through. And then so in 2018 through 2019, that's when LCMS International Mission was pulled into this project during this meeting in the Dominican Republic in order to really get this hymnal over the finish line. So they had done all of this legwork to compile the hymnal, compile the hymns together, the liturgies, the psalms, everything that was going to go into it. But they had all of those final steps of the doctrinal review, all of the copyrights, putting it, like actually doing all of the layout, all of those things that they needed some outside help as well and some expertise from our international mission group to kind of get it over the finish line. So that's when the committee was expanded to include Deaconess Sandra Rhein, who has boatloads of experience getting international hymnals completed, Reverend Ted Krey, and Deaconess Cheryl Naumann. So I did get to talk with Deaconess Sandra while she was in the building for the Day of Thanksgiving for Missionaries a few weeks ago. Basically, she has my dream job. If I ever were to become a missionary, I would want to do what she does. And I told her that. How cool would it be to help international church bodies put together their hymnals? It's just super cool. So like ultimate hymn nerd level job right there. So she is sacred music educator with LCMS International Mission, working primarily in Asia, but she has helped several church bodies produce hymns in their native languages. She has completed ones with the churches in Kenya and Ethiopia. She's currently finishing up the one in Indonesia and working on Sri Lanka and Chinese. So the list is growing, and it's just really amazing how these hymnals have been such a benefit to all of these church bodies to have all of this good Lutheran stuff in their own languages. So this hymnal, she said, was vastly different from those, though, because those church bodies or those language groups are much smaller and there's just less to work with. But the Spanish language group and just the amount of stuff that they were working with this was so huge. And so she did say it was 17 church bodies. It was just a much bigger project than the ones she had done previously. So her expertise that she really brought to this project was working through all of the copyrights and the doctrinal review work. And so there are 670 hymns in this hymnal. And not all of them are public domain. So you have to track down the copyright holders for the original text, the translation, the tune, the setting, if there is one. Like that's a lot of copyright work that you have to do. And in the US, it's somewhat easier because we have, publishing houses that hold a lot of these copyrights or facilitate them for the people that have them. Not so much the same with some of these more culturally Spanish hymns or things that were just kind of obscure from some place that just kind of had been passed down. So she got to track down a lot of those things, make sure the royalties were paid properly, get the permissions for all of these things. She actually paid a lot of these royalties herself because you have to pay a lot of these things online.
Yeah.
And these church bodies, a lot of them are really small and they don't actually have credit cards to pay these fees. So she was just paying them herself and then the church bodies were paying her back. But that just facilitating all of that work made this a lot easier to get it all finished. And these are they're small. There's like $150 to pay royalties. It's not like huge amounts of money that she was having to deal with, but really useful to get all of that done. And she also helped with the doctrinal review process which she hadn't done with an international hymnal before. So the cool thing is that this is also doctrinally reviewed for the LCMS. And there are rumors, and the hope is that this hymnal will be presented before convention next year in 2023 and maybe approved as an official hymnal of the LCMS so that it can be really, really utilized with our Spanish-speaking churches in the United States. I think that would be super cool. So there is hope that that will happen. So then 2020 to 2021, all of the final editing and correction happened. Very tedious work. It was approved by LCMS Doctrinal Review at this point as well. And all of the royalties are paid. And it went through 4 final reviews by the project churches. So lots of eyes looking at this. It was finally completed in July of 2021. So this is barely a year old from completion. Printed in Thailand in the beginning of this year, beginning of 2022, with 19,000 copies in the first edition. And they were all shipped to Brazil. So the Bible Society of Brazil is distributing it to 20 different countries around the world. So this is like almost literally hot off the presses at this point. In May of this year, there was a week-long symposium at Seminario Concordia El Reformador in the Dominican Republic, which is kind of becoming a real hub of Lutheranism and theological education in the Latin American Caribbean region. Super cool stuff. If you don't know about that seminary, there's a lot of stuff online. You can read about it. So there was a week-long symposium leading up to their graduation ceremony. The bishops and church presidents from multiple different church bodies were present for this symposium that was all about education and celebration of the release of this hymnal. So they were there from Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Guatemala, Mexico, Panama, Uruguay, and Venezuela. And Dr. Vieker shared some videos. I think the seminary also has a few videos of the singing that was happening during the symposium. It is amazing. Like, I just get goosebumps listening to it. One of them is the choir, the seminary choir singing, "O God, O Lord of Heaven and Earth" in Spanish. It's cool. It's very cool. So this symposium was full of scholars and church leaders presenting these papers about hymnody, interacting with the church's history of hymnody, the role of hymns in Christian suffering, the divine service and the theology of the cross, Luther and Gerhardt as composers, of course, and daily prayers at the family altar. Every day began with matins and ended with a hymn sing hosted by one of the symposium's presenters. So they got to sing, and they got like little mini lectures about stuff too. I really wish I could have been there, quite honestly. Sounds very magical. So the list of recognitions for organizations and people is just super long. Like I mentioned, there's just pages of like all of the people and organizations that were involved in this project. So it was supported by the Concordia Lutheran Education Foundation, David's Harp, which is an organization in Iowa that I'll talk about in a little bit. Lutheran Heritage Foundation, they're the ones that helped fund the actual printing of this. They have a whole system of printing in Thailand for all of the rest of their materials that they do. So they helped out with the printing of this. The Marvin Schwann Foundation, the Bible Society of Brazil, and LCMS International Mission. And then the full committee, there's just a whole bunch of people. I mentioned the pastors that were on this. The Lutheran Church of Chile is the one that actually holds the copyright for the hymnal. So they are kind of the ultimate like driving force behind all of this. This hymnal is huge, guys. It's about 1.5 Lutheran service books thick, even though it's only about 50 more pages. It's thick. 670 hymns, which I believe, no, that's close to what we have. Oh, I didn't do that math. I should have done that math. And we have more in the electronic version too, so I can look this up in here. We have not, whatever, I'm not going to do the math. Never mind, moving on. There are 90 psalms, 5 orders of service, which sounds familiar, 2 matin services, 2 vesper services, Compline, Luther's Small Catechism, the lectionaries, private confession and absolution, and other daily offices packed into it. And if you know some Spanish or some Spanish culture, Spanish is not the same between different countries, just like English is not the same between different countries too. So they did end up using kind of a common Spanish so that it would make sense across the different cultures in Latin America. So why a Spanish hymnal? Why now? Did one exist before now? Glad you asked. So in the history of Spanish language hymnals, there are a few others. The first Spanish hymnal was put out in 1927. Himnario Luterano was in 1936. Culto Cristiano was in 1964, and Cantad al Señor was in 1991.
I love that.
So it was it was time. The last hymnal was back in 1991, so it was time for a new one. Also, they wanted to bring together the best of all of these books and also bring in newly composed hymns and translations from past hymnals, much like we did with Lutheran Service Book, compiling kind of the best of the best and really making this a fantastic resource. So this hymnal was specifically meant to proclaim the gospel of forgiveness, eternal life, and salvation, to celebrate Christ and his gifts, and to sing and pray God's saving deeds, make petitions, thanksgiving, and praise. The hymnal committee had all of this with they were working under these 5 principles. First, faith in Christ needs to be sung, confessed, and proclaimed. The church of all times always sings its faith. Where the presence of God is, there is always singing.
I like that.
Yes. Second is lex orandi, lex credendi. Of course, what we do, say, and sing is what we believe. It is about our identity in Christ. So they want to be able to sing and pray Lutheran doctrine. Third, each generation receives an inheritance and in turn adds its own to leave to its children and grandchildren. So this is a legacy thing for these churches as well. Fourth, the Church of Christ is universal. So it sings from all times, all places, and all languages. And fifth, a hymnal is part of 3 books that make up the triad of faith: the Bible, Word of God, proclamation, the Catechism for catechesis, and the hymnal, hymns and life of faith. So that's kind of the big umbrella of what they were really trying to do with this hymnal. And quite honestly, I think they nailed it. So even with these 4 older hymn books, there was a real distinct need for a new, updated, really inclusive book for worship. Cantad al Señor from 1991 was meant to complement Culto Cristiano from 1964 with hymnology and Latin liturgical songs, but you still had to use multiple books during a service.
I attended a Spanish Lutheran church for a little while in the 90s when my mom played piano for it, and I was trying to learn Spanish. And I just remember it being really, obviously it was awkward because I was not a fluent Spanish speaker, but it was just clunky. And I don't think, let's just say this new hymnal is a very good thing.
Yeah, so it's just, you just had to use multiple books for hymnody and liturgy, not a totally great setup. And these 2 other hymnals were financially just challenging to keep up, so a lot of places were using songbooks or printed booklets or electronic versions to fill the gaps. So they wanted to have one book that everybody could use. And just like in American Lutheranism, there's been an influence of evangelical or theologically wishy-washy contemporary music and indiscriminate use of non-Lutheran hymnology and services. So they wanted to kind of pull in the reins on that and really get Lutheran hymnody for these churches to be singing. There's also just a lack of liturgical resources in Spanish, so that makes service planning difficult. And maybe one of the biggest reasons for a new hymnal, to bring unity to all of these churches, these Hispanic Lutheran churches around the world with the same practice. So this beautiful hymnal unites historic Lutheran hymnody with new Spanish hymns and unites them with Spanish liturgy and practice. So it integrates what's already in use in Hispanic churches and brings new hymnody from contemporary composers, much like we did with LSB, while at the same time translating historic classic Lutheran hymns, Lutheran Gerhardt, into Spanish. And it restores these older hymns to the original number of stanzas, because everybody wants to sing like all 15 stanzas of Gerhardt. I totally would.
Everyone. But
enough.
They can.
Yes.
They
enough people do.
The option.
Yes.
They are not limited.
Todos los versos. Todos.
Power to the people.
And one of the coolest things I think is that this hymnal is very much geared toward musicians using piano and guitar. So our hymnal, LSB, is very much, the OG LSB is very much for using it with an organ. Yeah. And then we have piano supplements and we have we have guitar supplements. But the original LSB is meant for organ. But this hymnal is meant for guitar and piano and alternate instruments, because there's like very few churches in these church bodies that use organ. Nearly all of them use piano or guitar as their main instrument, with, flutes and other instruments as well.
Yeah, they've got chords on everything.
Yes.
That is a fantastic innovation. As someone who played piano, because I don't play organ, but for church for a number of years, it was just always a bit of a struggle. And they did a fine job with certain songs in LSB having alternative piano arrangements, but to have a hymnal that is specifically for, a piano and guitar centric audience, was a very good move.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think the coolest part of that is that the Psalms for us in our LSB, we use Gregorian chant tones. And even if you don't know that they're Gregorian, if you hear them, you're like, oh yeah, that's a chant tone that we use in church. So all of those were rewritten by Pastor Fritz Bowie, who is a classical guitarist. And he rewrote all of the psalm tones to be used specifically on guitar because Gregorian chant tones don't really translate well to guitar. So these are all specifically meant to be used with guitar chords. Which and I think is amazing.
They have a tone for every on the page where you're singing. The notes
imagine that
for everyone.
Yes.
And some of them also have, what is it called when it's got the little verse that goes with it, the sort of canticle.
The antiphon?
Antiphon. So some of them there's quite a few of them that have an antiphon included as well.
Yeah.
Neat.
Which,
in line.
If the LSB ever gets reprinted, I would love it if the chant tones were actually printed.
Wink, wink.
Just saying. Might add another 50 pages, but that's okay. So it's also designed to be used in the home as a family prayer book, which I think our Lutheran service book is as well, but really encouraging families to use this book in their home for home worship at the home altar, and has resources for life of the individuals in the church and the catechism, just like our Lutheran service book. So hint, hint, if you ever need something in the catechism but only have access to the hymnal, it's all in there. It's very cool. It's just kind of hidden in between the Psalms and the orders of worship and the hymns. Where the hymns start, the catechism is all just before where the hymns start.
If you blink, you'll miss it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you flip too quickly,
really
you'll go right by it.
Emphasizes the fact that Luther's small catechism is the small catechism. So it all fits really short.
Yeah, not many pages, but it is in there. So out of the 670 hymns, 41% of them were from Culto Cristiano, so that's only 276. 55 of them were from Cantata al Señor. 31% are ones that we have in Lutheran Service Book, which I was surprised. That is a much lower number than I expected. But that also means that 60% of these are not in Lutheran Service Book, and a large majority of them are culturally Spanish, Latin hymns. So that is very cool. 34% of them are modern hymns. That's a large chunk. And 24% of them are unpublished Spanish hymns.
What does modern mean?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
What's your time frame?
I don't know the exact time frame, but it would be more contemporary. I'm guessing a Stephen Starkey kind of era.
Okay.
All of Luther's hymns are in there. I don't even think we have all of Luther's hymns in LSB.
No, we do not. We definitely do not. They're pretty excited about this, except apparently they discovered one.
There's one missing.
There's one that was missing. They thought they had them all. And then after it went to print, they discovered there was one more.
Ouch!
Quick, second edition stat.
Have all
right, hymnal supplement. Let's go. Let's
maybe
go.
In the second
Vámonos.
So this is why I need to learn Spanish, because I want to just use this hymnal. All of Luther's hymns, minus one, are in this hymnal, which is super cool. They have 15 Gerhardt hymns, of which 2 of them are exclusively in Spanish, which means we also don't have those in our hymnal.
That just crushes your soul,
It
doesn't
does. And there's also the biblical references for all of the hymns and liturgies like we have too. And there are several hymns that are culturally original Spanish. And like I mentioned, Jon Vieker wants to translate those into English for our hymnal, which is just an amazing thing. I keep mentioning, just like our LSB, they did actually use the Lutheran Service Book as the kind of model for this hymnal. And if you ever get to see, well, I'll share a picture of one so you can look at it. But they look very similar. It's got the same kind of logos and graphics on the front and the side of it. It's the same fonts and everything. So it very much is supposed to be modeled after the Lutheran Service Book as a kind of sister hymnal, and to be used in multilingual congregations, to be used kind of together, which
that's so cool.
Yeah, it already is, actually. It's very cool. So like the numbering system that we have, starting with the Psalms in the front, they do the same thing with that too. The notations, the notes, all of that. So all of that stuff looks the same. So if you're familiar with LSB, you would be familiar with using this hymnal as well. You would not get lost in it. It feels very similar, just a different language. So there's also 5 divine service settings, just like we have, but they are not the same. Setting 1 is from Cantar al Señor. Setting 2 is from Culto Cristiano. So those would not be recognizable to us. They definitely sound Spanish. Setting 3, however, is the ubiquitous Setting 3 from everywhere.
Yes.
Okay.
So DS3 means the same thing across multiple cultures, which I think is very cool. And it's the same Setting 3 as TLH page 15. So this one goes back to, the 1940s for us. Setting
time.
4, right. Setting 4 is from the Lutheran Church of Chile liturgy, and setting 5 is also an adaptation of the German Mass, Luther's German Mass of 1526. So that's going to be the same kind of format that we have, but probably using different hymns because it's a hymn-based liturgy anyway. So to make this even more accessible, I've already mentioned a few ways that they really wanted to make this very usable for people. But this is just really cool, to make this very accessible for people and for people to be able to really learn it and digest it and have it just very easy to access. They are in the process of recording the hymnal, like audio recording, all of it. So this is another thing that Deaconess Sandra was working on, and also Pastor Sherrill and David's Harp comes in. So they are actually recording all of the hymnal and the liturgies for people to be able to use. They have a website set up already. We can link to it in the show notes. There's really not anything on it yet because this is still very much a work in progress. They're also planning on an app for this. Wild and a massive project, but they are recording all of this so that congregations, first of all, so that pastors can learn this stuff, because they also want pastors to be able to chant the things in this hymnal. And if that's not a familiar thing, they want to have this as audio versions so that pastors can learn the chanting parts of this, especially for the Psalms and the liturgy. And also, if congregations don't have a musician, they would be able to use this audio as their music in worship so that they would still have the audio for people to be able to sing along with. And people can just use it in their homes as part of devotions too.
That's really cool. And especially with, what did you say, 24% of the hymns in there are new and previously unpublished. I mean, to have this massive work of education going on with the release of the hymnal is not only cool, but it's also essential. Yeah. Because teaching new hymns to a congregation that has never heard them before is hard, and you need all the resources you can get. So that's well done them.
Yes. So this recording project is being facilitated through David's Harp, which is in Council Bluffs, Iowa, based out of St. Paul's Lutheran Church, which also is St. Paul's Music Conservatory, which is kind of like the original Lutheran Music Conservatory. David's Harp is branching out with this, trying to get more music conservatories across the country, putting out all of these educational resources, printing resources, and establishing these centers for musical development in churches, schools, and missions of the LCMS. So this is their mission. Still relatively new. I think they're only a few years old, but they are just doing amazing work, really teaching people how to be church musicians or just giving people music lessons in their communities. Very cool stuff. So highly recommend, if that sounds interesting to you, to check them out. They do great work, and Pastor Sherrill will gladly talk to you about David's Harp and what they do. So I got to talk with him as well a little bit just about this project. Deaconess Sandra was actually an advisor for David's Harp as they were getting off the ground a few years ago. And she was the one that suggested to Pastor Krey that he should talk to Pastor Sherrill about doing this recording project. So that was the connection there. And it's perfect, actually, because St. Paul's Music Conservatory has grown and actually has recording spaces and a sound engineer and access to all these musicians. So it's kind of like the perfect place for them to really be doing this project. Long story short, Sandra helped organize the whole thing. She went to the studio in Council Bluffs, did some recording. And then she was like, if we're going to record and take all of this time to engineer all of this audio, it is never going to get finished. So they had to kind of dole out the hymns and the liturgy and things to other people and record it maybe on like smartphones and then kind of process everything so it sounds similar, because it is a massive project to record all of this. Elizabeth Grimpo, who also works with St. Paul's Music Conservatory, doing like beginner or graduated piano books, amazing resources to learn liturgy and hymns on piano, by the way. She recorded about 60 of them on piano. Pastor Frank did about 24. Sandra herself recorded several hundred of them. So
she's the Alexander Hamilton of the hymn world.
I mean, it was very convenient that COVID hit at the time that they were starting to do this. So she literally just like,
never thought you'd say.
Yeah. Holed up in her house with the hymnal and a piano and just like blasted through literally hundreds.
Whatever it takes to keep your sanity in a pandemic.
Right.
She did say also there were about 100 of them that were so Spanish in nature that she's like, an American should not record these. You need a Spanish pianist to record this, so it just has the authentic, correct flair to them. So some of them she didn't record, just so it actually sounded right. So they were just recording the music, and then all the files are sent to either Argentina or Chile or the DR somewhere, and they're the ones that actually put the vocals to them. So it's not this is all, the vocals are happening in a Latin American country. And then it's all going to be put together and then put on the website and the app, which is very much still in progress. A bit of a hiccup that I wouldn't have even thought about, but sending these files, these are fairly large files. I mean, a music file is not small. You have to have some fairly decent internet to be able to even download it to your computer and then upload it wherever it's going. So they're running into a bit of an issue just having the internet bandwidth in some of these church bodies to be able to even download the music. So it's happening. It's just slow progress. So she's hoping in about 6 months or so, the recordings will be done and ready for the website. And at that point, you can actually go listen to everything. That's cool. Totally going to do. Deaconess Cheryl Naumann, also working on this project. She is also working on the distribution of it. She's the director of the VDMA project, which is getting Spanish resources in ebook form so that more pastors and church workers in the Spanish-speaking countries can have Lutheran Spanish resources like at their fingertips, quite literally. So she's working to get this distributed as an ebook to everyone in the VDMA project so that they have access to it. And she's also assisting some of the logistics with the Bible Society of Brazil to get the hymnals distributed to all of the countries. And she says that the hymnal will, quote, provide a great deal of harmony, not only between our partner churches, but also between LCMS mission churches and the emerging Lutheran church bodies that will grow out of our LCMS missions. In addition to the recording project for the website, the app, the distribution on ebook, and the print version, they're also compiling the propers of each celebration according to the liturgical season in a single document. So you've got everything all together. And then Luther Academy, which does a whole lot of theological education globally, they're doing conferences to implement the hymnal. So more education and getting people really into the hymnal. And then workshops are going to happen at the Mercy Center and Concordia Seminary, the reformer of the Dominican Republic, for lay people and musicians. So like the first symposium that they had, they're going to do more of these to just really get people immersed in this Lutheran hymnody and liturgy. So it's a big push to really get people familiar with this. And there are plans for a second edition in 2023, which is next year, of 20,000 copies. And they already have 180 errors that many people have sent them to fix because so it goes with book publishing.
When you have a book that's big, that's a pretty reasonable number.
Right. Yeah. That's about all of the like really nitty gritty detail. I do have a couple more stories I want to share with you though before we're done. So I mentioned that the Reverend Sergio Fritzler gave me the massive document. He was very heavily involved with this entire project. And so he gave me two stories also.
Where
about.
Where is he based out of?
He is in the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Right now. Yes. So the strongest personal This is quote, "The strongest personal anecdote for me is in these years of dedication happened in the last 2 weeks of full-time work. I worked 6 months part-time. It was mid-June 2021, and we needed to deliver the project to Thailand in order to not lose the paper that was available." This is pandemic time.
Supply chain.
"This urgent situation made me work an average of 14 hours a day. But on the last day, June 30th, I worked 20 hours straight without a break.
Oh my goodness.
I finished in the next day. I traveled on vacation with my family to the beach in the Dominican Republic, but I was so focused on work that I spent the next 3 days without sleep. But on the fourth day, I slept all day, and then I was able to enjoy the rest with my family." So talk about dedication.
Dang.
Wow.
Yeah. And another true story that happened in my life in the midst of the pandemic and work in 2020. In May, my sister-in-law died of cancer, and in September, my mother died of COVID. We were unable to travel to both funerals because of the pandemic. I began to search for hymns of comfort and resurrection, so I translated Benjamin Schmolk's hymn, Hallelujah, Jesus lebt, and there came the idea of translating hymns as text, so the lyrics only, to fill the dead spaces in the hymnal. Genius. So the hymnal does not have 670 hymns, but 686 if you include all of the ones without music. So the congregation has more possibilities with unpublished hymns in Spanish with a strong confessional Lutheran tradition. So,
okay.
So cool.
Hymns in time of great need. So I also reached out to the Reverend Herman Novelli-Oliveros, who is the outgoing president of the Hispanic National Convention, about his experience with the hymnal, because I know he has used it, especially for use in the United States. And I believe he is located in Wisconsin at a bilingual congregation, English-Spanish, if I'm remembering right. The Hispanic National Convention just happened in Orlando in August of this year, and every participant got one of these hymnals at this convention. So it is now out and about in the wild in the U.S. for use. So he told me, "This is my fourth," quote, "this is my fourth Lutheran hymnal in Spanish, and I've never seen something like this before. It is filled with not just hymns, but with different liturgies that can be used in churches and also in homes. What a wonderful thing it is to bring God back into our lives and our homes with our families and children and raise them in the faith. This hymnal will help with that and will lead us to pray at our dinner tables, praise the Lord, and grow in His Word. I used the hymnal for the first time in my congregation this week. As you may know, I serve a bilingual congregation, and our worship services are bilingual English and Spanish. The Himnario Luterano's connection with the American LSB is fantastic. I can find the same hymns in both languages, and we can worship in both languages without me having to make translations of stanzas or making changes to the music. This hymnal is creating unity and helping our bilingual pastors in an amazing way. I have said this before, the hymnal will be a blessing in Latin America, where worship services are always in Spanish language, but also here in America in our Hispanic and multicultural congregations. It will be a blessing for our pastors as well as they create their worship liturgies for Sunday and also for special occasions. It contains a lot of hymns, and all of them are historic worship songs of our church. And it also has several liturgies, prayers, etc. This should be on every pastor's desk and also in our homes. La iglesia que adora unida permanecerá unida. Sorry, I butchered that. The church that sings and worships together will remain together. Unity in diversity. Peace, Pastor Herman. So he's already using it, and it's been amazing for him.
And his words remind us that a good hymnal is much more than a songbook.
Yeah.
You know, it is a worship compendium. You know, it's got everything you need to worship at home and at church and anywhere else. It's just all right there. And so the fact that this isn't just a songbook, it's a hymnal, is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. And finally, I have one more quote from the Reverend Dr. Jonathan Naumann, Deaconess Cheryl Naumann's husband. They're a team together in the DR. He teaches worship and liturgy at Seminario Concordia Reformador in the Dominican Republic. He sees this new hymnal as this great resource for pastoral formation. And he echoes kind of what Pastor Herman was saying, that, quote, "No matter what country the seminary students come from, and we have students from about 12 different countries so far, these men will all learn together how to lead the divine service using the same hymnal that is being used in their own countries." So this is creating this sense of real community among all of these pastors who are being formed together at the seminary. And it's just, goosebumps. I love it. That's all I got.
That's wonderful.
Big fan.
I did a little hymnal math while you were
good.
talking.
Thank you.
And it does appear that the Himnario Luterano has 34 more hymns. So
very nice.
Yes.
Thank you for saving me from my math.
I just got to give you mega kudos because that was an impressive amount of legwork you did to pull together all the facts on this. Not quite as impressive as Pastor Fritzler's massive marathon sessions pre-pub, but still, hats off to you for tracking down all this information and these wonderful insights.
Yes.
We got the behind-the-scenes story.
You did. Yes, you did. And thank you to Courtney Zalmanoff, too, for pointing me in the right direction to find some people, too. She was my inside person.
She works with me.
She does.
She's cool. She's cool people.
She's mentioned in the hymnal.
She is. Yes, her name is. She was in the Dominican Republic while this was going on.
She got to play a part in this project.
Yes.
It's cool how many people were part of it.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing.
Major group effort. So I did also reach out to Pastor Krey and his family. So if you keep listening at the end of this podcast, you'll hear them sing from the hymnal.
Yes.
So
that's a treat.
Stay tuned for that treat after our little closing. Well, ladies, we would love to hear from you in our Facebook group. If you, have any thoughts or anything else you'd like to share with us about hymnals in general, or this new Spanish hymnal, or if you would like to get one, actually, I will put in the show notes how you can do that. If you reach out to the Lutheran Heritage Foundation, you can request to get a hymnal. So if this is something that would be interesting for you, or you know someone who speaks Spanish who could use one, or if you know of a multilingual congregation, we'll put that in the show notes, how you can reach out to them, or just post in the Facebook group and we can share that too. Join us there on Facebook. You can also follow us on Instagram at Lutheran Ladies Lounge. We have extra content there. Sometimes we share extra things that don't actually go in the Facebook group all the time. So you can find all of our content there as well. If you're not on social and you would like to get our e-newsletter in your inbox, you can sign up for that e-newsletter, find out how in the show notes for this episode, or you can email us, lutheranladies@kfuo.org. You can find all of our podcasts at kfuo.org/Lutheran Ladies Lounge, or on your favorite podcasting app, or on the KFUO radio app. You're listening to the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Erin.
Soy Brie.
And I'm Rachel.
As promised, here is the Krey family singing El Señor Resucitó, Himnario Luterano number 493, and you'll recognize this Easter hymn, and O Santissimo, Himnario Luterano number 418, which is a Christmas hymn. Thanks to Becca Krey for sending these. And as an extra special treat, Deaconess Sandra Rhein sent a few parts of the Divine Service Setting 4 in Himnario Luterano, written by Reverend Sergio Fritzler. Enjoy!
Divine Service 4, Confession and Absolution. Divine Service 4, Gloria Patri. Divine Service 4, Nunc Dimittis.
Views and opinions expressed on the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast may not represent the official position of the management or ownership of KFUO Radio, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The Lutheran Ladies Lounge is produced by KFUO Radio and available at kfuo.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a review for us too. If you love the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast, consider financially supporting our producer, KFUO Radio, so we can keep doing what we do. Find out how at kfuo.org/give.